Have you ever actually stopped to wonder how a wildly diverse nation of over 1.4 billion people organizes itself? Without just completely falling apart? It is a monumental task. Actually, think of a country as a massive, sprawling house. To keep a structure like that standing, you need a flawless, meticulously designed blueprint. So, today, we're going to explore this architectural marvel together. Let's dive right into the master plan that holds the world's largest democracy together in this explainer. Here's our roadmap for what we'll be covering today. First, the blueprint of governance. Second, pillars of the republic. Third, designing the Constitution. Fourth, navigating a diverse democracy. And finally, number 5, a living document.
All right, let's jump straight into part 1, the blueprint of governance, laying the bedrock.
So for those of us who follow civics, you've probably heard the word polity thrown around. It's an old Greek concept, and it simply refers to our structural organization. If our country is that giant house we just talked about, the polity is literally the physical floor plan. It tells us exactly where the walls are, who's in charge of what, and how power is basically distributed across the entire space. Now, politics, well, that's the dynamic and, let's be honest, sometimes messy interaction happening inside that structure. It's that ongoing, vital negotiation of how we share this massive space together, making the decisions necessary to ensure both societal harmony and progress. Which brings us to the government. Think of them as the executing body, or basically the management team hired to maintain the house and enforce the daily rules. And their actions impact your life every single day. Everything from the income taxes you pay right down to the fuel prices you see at the pump. Moving right along to Section 2, Pillars of the Republic, Freedom, Equality, and Justice. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that in India, these pillars are highly context-dependent. They aren't just abstract ideas floating in the clouds. They bend and flex based on the realities on the ground. Think of negative liberty like this. You have the absolute freedom to stretch your arm out, right? But only until your fingertips touch the nose of the person standing next to you. That boundary is negative liberty. Positive liberty, on the flip side, is the state actively stepping in to provide the conditions you need for individual growth. We also have to face the hard reality of inequality within our structure. First, you have natural inequality. These are just unalterable differences based on innate talents, like, being a phenomenal singer or a star athlete. But then we have social inequality, and this is the real structural damage. We're talking about unequal opportunities and exploitation stemming from deep historical issues like caste, gender, or religion. Our blueprint has to actively address this specific type of damage. So, how do we fix these deep-seated issues? Well, political philosopher John Rawls introduced a brilliant concept called the veil of ignorance. Imagine you're tasked with designing the rules for society, but, and here's the catch, you have absolutely no idea what your own background, caste, religion, or social status will be once you step into it. If you operate behind this veil, you're pretty much forced to judge purely on merit and create a truly just society, right? Because there's no way you'd risk creating a system that might end up discriminating against you. Okay, consider the difference between equality and equity, because they are not the same thing. Imagine a running race between a fully able-bodied runner and a runner who's missing a leg. If we enforce strict equality, they run under the exact same rules, which honestly isn't fair at all. But equity is stepping in to fit a robotic leg to the runner with one leg, giving them the same strength and speed so they can actually compete fairly. This exact philosophy is what drives affirmative action and reservation policies in India, stepping in to correct those historical social imbalances. All right, let's get into Section 3, Designing the Constitution, the Master Plan. Drafting this master blueprint? Yeah, definitely not an overnight job. It was a massive, sprawling journey that kicked off with the 1928 Nehru document and led all the way to the Constituent Assembly in 1946. Just picture the scene, 114 days of fierce democratic debate, poring over more than 2,000 amendments, all before it was finally enacted in 1950. And the framers? They were kind of like brilliant master architects. They famously ransacked all the major constitutions of the world to find the absolute best materials for India. They grabbed the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity from France. They borrowed the parliamentary democracy model straight from Britain, and they looked over to the USA for inspiration on fundamental rights. But they didn't just copy and paste. They carefully adapted all these global inspirations to perfectly fit the unique Indian context. So, how does this actually play out in everyday life? Section 4. Navigating a diverse democracy. Living in the house. Living in a house with 1.4 billion people, all bringing different cultures, religions, and languages to the table, yeah, it's bound to get a little noisy. But a functioning democracy is dynamic, and honestly, it thrives on this noise. It relies heavily on constant political deliberation. That means citizens are out there actively questioning the systems, vigorously debating things like the reliability of electronic voting machines or electoral processes. And, crucially, it requires a government that actually has the capacity for self-correction. We saw this responsiveness recently when intense public protests led the government to completely reverse course on the farm laws. This push and pull, it isn't a flaw in the blueprint. It's practically the main feature. Now, this massive diversity also dictates how the state interacts with religion. In Western secularism, think France or the US, there's a very strict mutual exclusion. The state and religion absolutely do not mix. The focus is entirely on the individual, which is why you often see bans on public displays of religious symbols. Indian secularism, though, is a completely different ballgame. It relies on a principle of positive engagement. Because India has such an incredibly rich religious landscape, the state actively respects, supports, and protects all diverse religious communities equally, while still holding on to the right to intervene if social reform is needed. Which brings us to our final part today, Section 5, a living document, remodeling the blueprint. You see, an effective architectural master plan for a nation just can't be completely static. Society evolves, right? And the blueprint has to be capable of being remodeled. Which brings up a really fascinating question. Is a constitution a sacred, untouchable document? Or is it more like an ordinary set of laws that we should just easily rewrite to fit modern times? If you look around the globe, you kind of see two extremes. The USA has a highly rigid constitution. It is incredibly difficult to amend, which is exactly why debates around deeply entrenched issues, like gun ownership laws, can remain completely gridlocked for decades. On the flip side, you have Britain, which has a highly flexible system. There, Parliament is essentially supreme, and constitutional changes can happen pretty easily as the Parliament itself evolves. So the really cool part is that India found a brilliant middle ground. Our constitution is this unique blend of rigidity and flexibility. I mean, we've amended it over 100 times to adapt to modern realities, like rolling out GST. However, this flexibility is heavily safeguarded by the Supreme Court. Back in 1973, the landmark case of Anand case established what's called the Basic Structure Doctrine. Basically, it means Parliament can absolutely remodel the House, but they absolutely cannot take a sledgehammer to its foundational load-bearing pillars, things like democracy, secularism, and judicial review. And that brings us to the end of our structural tour today. We've seen the bedrock, the pillars, and the sheer genius of this master plan. But remember, a house only stays strong if the people living inside take care of it. So, as citizens living within this grand architectural marvel, holding immense power through universal adult franchise, what is your responsibility? How will you actively maintain, debate, and perfect this living blueprint for the generations that follow? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it leaves you with plenty to think about. Catch you next time.